Welcome, everyone. My name is Geoff Hultin from Outside Insights Business Consulting from Vancouver, Canada. This is the first episode in the Scaling Telecom Revenue series. This series is built around the core idea that telecom can be highly profitable, but only if it's designed to scale as a system. And that system has to integrate into the customer's technical environment and into their business environment. And if that system isn't designed properly, things don't just get messy, they completely break. I'm joined today by Dan Noworatzky from TeleDynamics and Mark Loveys from Datagate. Dan works directly with partners who are designing and deploying telecom environments, and Mark focuses on what happens after the sale, how that system turns into revenue, invoices, and cash. Welcome, guys.
Thanks.
You too.
As we know, most telecom businesses don't really struggle at the beginning. There's just a couple customers, a few trunks. It's pretty straightforward, right? And everything works. But as the business scales and it really grows up, you add features and complexity and product catalogs and all of these things. That's when real issues start to show up, and you run into things like call quality problems, set up environments that behave differently across different sites, pricing, bundling and package, costs change, and margins really can get unclear. And the key point really is it's not really random. It's what happens if a system isn't really designed to scale and it wasn't planned correctly from the beginning. Dan, like, you must see this all the time. What actually starts to break when things start to scale?
That's a great question, and I think looking at it, there's two sides of it that come across. One is in the territorial side where a customer might be used to selling in a certain area. They've kind of figured out the FCC rules and regulations and taxation on maybe how their city and state start billing, but then they start expanding past that, and now they've got no idea on how some different cities and states do the billing, and so that's one area where scaling kind of breaks down. But more of what we see is working with those dealers that are doing the systems integrations and installations, and that's where we see things get a little bit tricky when they're developing a voice solution. It's really a system is a piece of hardware that they're putting in, but it's really an entire solution that they're having to come outside the box and develop. And voice is just the output of that system. So those things depend on the network infrastructure, different routing, logarithmic algorithms. Wi-Fi is starting to become a larger play in those networks. Quality of service is still important. It used to be something we had to program back in the day, but now we just have to implement it and make sure that we have it on all of our routing tables. And then the big one is failover. If everything is configured across multiple locations, we need to have failover to make sure that it goes from point A to point B should a network outage occur. And so the business operations comes into play. We need to make sure that we know how they want those systems to ring in, how they want their systems designed, call flow, who's answering the phones. So a lot of this are things that the dealer is having to get on the front end, and if they ever forget to ask some of those key important questions, that's when a lot of trouble happens. And so what happens if that system isn't designed properly? It might work at a small scale, but as soon as you start to grow, it starts falling apart. And so the reality is when telecom is treated like a product, it'll work until you try to scale it and scale it to either across multiple customers or one large customer across multiple locations.
So you really have to think about it from the business operations side then, correct? It's not just a technical drop it in and it works.
That's right. Yeah, and as something as simple as that call routing, when you have multiple locations, inter branch calling, you have different IVRs and auto attendants, the front desk coveraging, call queues. So, give an example. What happens if you're forwarding a SIP call to external numbers? Sometimes that takes some additional programming in the system, but it also takes some additional programming on the SIP trunk. If you have calls that need to roll between locations, you either have different peer trunks or you have maybe some older systems that require VPNs to connect those multiple locations. So it really the consistency is operations, finding out how they're using the systems, and then developing your network to accommodate all that. And again, if it's not thought through properly, that's where the breakdown occurs, and that's usually where our team focuses on a lot of those tech support phone calls from the dealers that are out in the field. They've run into an issue and they really hadn't put everything on paper and kind of thought it through, and so the customers feel it immediately. And so we used to talk about a site survey when premise PBXs dominated the industry. And those site surveys are still important today because without it, you're reacting instead of delivering a solution. And it's not just that telephony piece of the solution, there's still the networking and the entire data side is critical today.
So you're really saying that, people installing telecom and growing telecom solutions really need to act as a business advisor almost, helping their customers understand how this is going to support their business growth.
Absolutely. And when you act as that business advisor or trusted advisor, you are able to have solution sales and you're not just selling a system, you're selling an entire solution. And more often than not, that helps increase revenue because now you're not just selling a few phones or some SIP trunks. You're now able to take a look at their entire network and you can upgrade their network topology, their Wi-Fi infrastructure. Maybe they didn't have PoE switches. You hadn't thought about that. So there's a lot more that goes on with being a trusted advisor and then selling other solutions that the dealers may happen to sell, whether that may be fax to email or whatever it is. It becomes easier when you're looking at a solution sale instead of just a hardware sale.
Right, right. So, Mark, let's bring you in on this. So, I would guess that the same kind of principles really apply on the finance, the billing side of things as well.
Exactly. In fact, everything that Dan has just described has a financial system side to it as well. And so, as you get more customers in your business, that means more services, more usage, more variables, more complexity, more data, uh, and more revenue, of course. All of these things start to compound if you haven't got the right systems in place. And if that would mean you're trying to cope with spreadsheets, manual processes. That's going to bring in delays, errors, stress on your staff, etc. When you're rekeying from one system to another, you've got data in your PSA system that doesn't match your accounting system. All of this starts, it may be bearable and quite manageable, when you're smaller, but as you get larger as a business, this becomes intolerable. And really, what we see is that when you start outgrowing your systems, invoices start going out late. Invoices have mistakes, errors on them. Customers don't understand the invoice. The invoice amateur doesn't look like a professional business, and so people start making judgment about your business based on what they're seeing in the billing side of things. Payments get delayed, very, very important to any business. So really, this all starts to compound. And what we say that if a system isn't designed properly, scaling makes things worse, not better. And in fact, what we always say is the best time to address system issues is as early as possible, because it just gets harder and harder as the business grows.
Right, right. Well, and let's talk a bit about how that affects sales, because it's not just, the customers and the process and the back end, but it's your future sales too. And how do you grow your business? So what do you see, Dan? Can you give us a quick snippet?
Yeah, and again, since we're working with dealers from across the country, I've heard some of this through the grapevine when talking to them on the technical side. They've told me, if the system isn't put in right, they're having to deploy additional resources that they hadn't planned in quoting to go in and fix those problems and to remain on that job site long after it was installed, to kind of correct some of those issues that weren't thought of beforehand. Maybe it was network issues or firewall issues or routing issues. But if that system's not right, sales feels it immediately because now that they've had to deploy additional resources and personnel to go and fix things that weren't going smoothly. And issues always come up. I'm not saying that every job installs easy and right the first time, but when the customer and that end consumer hesitates, sales teams are going to hesitate because now they're not wanting to sell other pieces of hardware into a solution or into a site that has problems. So instead of building that momentum, I've heard from these customers that sometimes it slows sales down with that one customer.
Right, right. And Mark, what do you see?
Well, I see that, especially in the United States, there's also the issue of tax and compliance, and some people in the early stages try and do this manually, and that can actually become a big liability on the business if it's not handled properly right from the start. So I mean, a typical case that we see is a business comes to us and they say, look, we decided to sort out all our systems, and we want to do things properly now, more systematically. And ideally, the business owner might say to us, look, I want to set this business up for sale eventually. And so now we want to systemize everything. Okay, so that's a good idea to invest in systems and get it right. But of course, if you've left it a while, you've got a track record of time that things maybe weren't automated and systemized, and from a tax and compliance point of view, that can be a concern, especially when you come to sell business. Someone looking at the business in a due diligence process is going to say, okay, well, you've had good systems in place from this year through to that year, but what about these years? What were you doing then, and what were you doing with your taxes and compliance at that stage? Because all of these things are something that's on your track record. If you don't handle taxes properly, the problem doesn't actually go away. It may hide itself, but when it comes to selling the business, the fact that you haven't got an auditable trail of how did you calculate all these taxes can be a big liability. In fact, a bull in the china shop, as they say.
Right, right. That's actually a really good use case and a really practical example. Dan, do you have a practical kind of use case example that you could cite as well?
Yeah, again, with dealers from over the country that call in for support, we hear a lot about this almost daily. Example would be a dealer starts out with one customer. That customer has a single location, simple setup, works fine. They put the system in, and maybe a year or so down the road, they call back in that customer of theirs is wanting to make some upgrades. So their initial inter office calling, no problem. Their auto attendant logic has been fine, worked just fine. Front desk coverage has been fine. Now they're wanting to integrate video conferencing between their site and another site. So maybe they've added a second site or a third site. But because the system wasn't initially designed for that, they have more upfront time that they have to spend to get the initial site up to standards to allow for some networking across sites. And then our tech support really kind of gets involved with that. Because calls now have to be routed a little bit differently to allow proper routing between sites. Network configurations are definitely something that has to take in consideration now that wasn't there initially in that first go round. And then the big thing that we're seeing now too is the video and voice solutions weren't planned to integrate with that first install. And so now with adding video and voice and wanting to integrate it into their voice system and solution, it's more services that are being added, so it's more complexity. Billing kind of gets complex on that because now you're talking about services maybe from Microsoft that are being added in, and different license structures that you need to have. But you've also have additional operational issues to consider on how that user is going to log in, whether that's through their Teams account or they're going to be logging in through their system account that they had set up with their voice provider. Are they going to have those connect to each other somewhere and integrate on the back end? And so customer frustration kind of goes up in those situations. Obviously, the financial complexity goes up when you're adding month-to-month licenses and reoccurring licenses on top of what you already had set up. So from something that worked fine at a small scale, dealers trying to onboard new customers throughout this process, that's where some of the things that come into play that make it a little bit more frustrating for them. So they're dealing with that one customer, but they're trying to onboard new customers at the same time. And I think that's where you see some of those sales impact.
Right, right. And Mark, like I know you gave us a quick example already, but can you give us another example of what happens on the financial side if systems aren't designed correctly from the beginning? You talked about tax and compliance. Are there other issues that arise?
Absolutely. I mean, and Dan did touch on some of this, the complexity you get with customers, as you move, as your business grows and you're across more states, and you start getting customers that are operating in multiple areas. The complexity of trying to do this type of thing on anything other than a purpose-built telecom billing system, you're going to be juggling all sorts of not only taxes, but breaking things down by branches and locations. When you're in multiple jurisdictions, on the same invoice, you may have to work out taxes differently. So this is something that we see a lot, and I guess the recurring theme that comes through in a lot of the cases that I can think of, I don't want to name anybody individually, but is really a lot of guys wishing they'd done stuff sooner and get systems in place early. It may seem like overkill, but it's the easiest time to put the system in place. And as your business grows, the system that you put in place will just create less resistance to that growth. It'll keep up with what you're doing. And so you're designing a business for growth in the future. If you try and backfill systems, I mean, if you don't have the system in the first place, you've really got to do it. But backfilling is hard. You've got a lot of data that you've got to rework and backfill into those systems. So it's harder. And I think the other thing is the sign of a good system is that it's auditable as well. You've got a clear way in those times that things do go wrong, or they get questioned, or they get audited, or they have due diligence, that you can go back and say, here is how it was calculated. Here is what was done. It's using a reputable tax engine. Tax calculations are all standard. I can't emphasize enough how important that is. So I guess the theme we hear is do it early if you can. Get the systems in place earlier, and the subject of tax, get your taxes right so you can sleep at night. It's one of my favorite sayings.
Right. Well, and so I guess what you guys are both really saying is, think about what you're trying to do, where you're trying to go, put in place the building blocks early at the beginning so that you can scale, and think about when you're going out to your to deploy, you're looking at your customer environments. Dan, this is, I think what you're saying is really like, think about the whole environment. And what is that customer trying to accomplish? How do they operate? What do you need to deploy in order to support them, not just today, but next year, the year after that, so that you have something that scales with the minimum of effort, so that people are happy, your sales teams are motivated, the customers are paying on time, like everything is working.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to look at too is how do you compress timeframes, and that's something that if we're being honest, one of the things that we've tried to do is develop a white glove service to allow those dealers to get in and out of a customer site more quickly and efficiently. And one of the things that we do is offer provisioning services to help pre-configure those phones and those systems. And we even do some white glove services where we'll, in the provisioning process, put data box stuffers in there, so the dealers have their maybe it's how to set up your voicemail, one sheet or something that has their logo on there. So when it gets to that end consumer, it looks like it's been, hand touched. There's information in there about that install. We'll even label the boxes with extension number and name, just so that when they open the box and there's 20 or 30 phones, they know exactly, hey, this is Jeff's phone, this is Dan's phone, this is Mark's phone. And so there's no guessing or reading MAC addresses. And so those things help make the installation smooth and efficient too. So it's even beyond just checking the network topology.
Right. And so part of your promise is helping your dealers, your network, increase their professionalism, increase how they look, grow their brand, and support them and grow in their business.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's fantastic. So I'd like to bring today's session to a close. And just before I do, I'd like to ask Mark and Dan. Mark, if you can go first. Do you have any closing comments for people as we come to the end of this session?
Yes, thank you, Geoff. I think the theme that I see through what Dan is saying and what I've been saying too is also, with the systems is good systems enable business to scale faster, but and also to create a professional impression on the customer, and that's very, very important. And so, what I like about what Dan's service is it's out of the box. It's got all the kit that you expect if you'd ordered something from a big corporation that's got all their systems out pat. And the same way with Datagate, we like to produce a professional telecom invoice that could have come from one of the biggest telecom providers, and supports all of the types of deals and pricing that the big guys would support. And so, from what I see, Dan and myself, what we're working towards is helping our service providers give the top level of service as well, to scale their businesses and really compete with the big guys, and offer all the benefits that the big guys can offer, and along with the flexibility that a small business can offer. So that's my take on it. Thank you.
Awesome. Dan?
Yeah, agreed. I think, like Mark said, if you're doing some white glove with your billing and you're making sure that you're presenting your brand through billing, do the same thing through the hardware procurement and the installation process. So I would say take advantage of pre-sales support, probably more than you would from post-sale support, and that'll help you with your installation on the front end instead of having to be reactive on the back end.
Awesome. Well, thanks, gentlemen. This has been a good conversation today, and I think it really puts out a solid foundation for the future podcasts that we're planning to do together. I'd like to thank you, Dan. Thank you, Mark, for your time today. And to our listeners, if this topic resonates, well, please feel free to reach out to Dan or Mark directly if you've got interest in furthering the conversation. Thank you very much, everybody. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.